I would like to introduce first Andrew Bridgewater. Andrew Bridgewater is the chair of Liberal Democrats Education, and he's the vice chair of Devon and Cornwall, and a candidate for Tottenham's Rural for the Devon County. He's had 20 years experience as school governor, including 2 special schools, and served as a member of the London Borough of Hackney for 2 years, of which were under NOC. Now this acronym...
No.
Okay. Well, I'll ask Andrew to explain all that and give us his wisdom on this issue.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to stand up in the expectation you can hear me better. First of all, I'd like to thank not only EMLD, but also ASCL for helping to bring this session together. And we've all contributed time and indeed money to make it happen. And so I think it's good to actually thank you, both organisations, for doing that. And indeed, producing a subject that is common to both the party organisations and of interest to the ASCL. I'm going to talk particularly about an area which the LDA is currently doing some work, which actually Professor John Howson is heading, but he's also heading to Brussels. So you've got me instead. And I'm going to start by actually stating what the problem is. We have a problem with exclusions in schools, too many permanent exclusions, and this does relate back to equalities, are those already with special educational needs and those that should have been identified as having special educational needs, and also an above average number of looked after children. In fact, all the young people that already have many complex problems. Now, I know as a governor that's had to sit at far, far too many permanent exclusion hearings, chairing the governor's committee that either has to uphold or accept the head teacher's recommendation. Incidentally, those of you that followed the education bill and the change to the advisory nature of appeal panels will probably not have realised that the process through which the head teacher recommends and the governing body committee makes the final decision has not changed. Now, my experience of those is that where we clearly had a young person that was known to the youth justice system, we weren't advised or told what those issues were. They were, of course, confidential to the youth justice system. Likewise, they had no clue about the problems within their school. So we had a situation where we were judging that young person on the events within the school and with no understanding of their problems with youth justice, in other words, to varying degrees breaking the law. Now, my firm conviction from all that experience, and I wished I'd come to it sooner, is that without the school, and possibly the local authority, liaising with the youth justice system, we will continue to be doing quite possibly opposite things. Youth justice has developed well. It now has a policy of not taking young people from the community, in other words, incarcerating them, unless it's absolutely necessary. And in the middle of all this, something quite serious could happen at their school, and they'd be kicked out. And the problem is then that there's no consistent way of supporting, dealing with that young person. You're probably wondering, what's that got to do with equalities? Well, in particular, not surprisingly, I have to say in my experience, Black, Caribbean, mixed heritage, and also Gypsy, Roma, and traveller communities predominate in the exclusion process, and indeed their relationship with the youth justice system. So what we're actually doing is discriminating against that young person. That is not to say that there shouldn't be measures to deal with the problems that they've created and they have, but it must be seen to be as equal as possible, first of all, for all members of the community, whatever their disabilities or special educational needs or other issues may be, and using such a system where these things do not come together, we are in danger of not achieving that purpose. We are actually letting down the most vulnerable and challenged members of our community. And that is why I believe we should do something about it. That's why the LDA is currently looking at that particular issue. It's an issue that largely gets ignored because the linkage, frankly, never occurred to me until I was involved in these disciplinary hearings for young people that were recommended for permanent exclusion. And if they are in a special school, after being permanently excluded from their mainstream school, where do they go? Well, I have to tell you my experience on the street. And that is so fundamentally wrong. And as a Liberal Democrat, I cannot ever accept that. So we have to do something to ensure that we continue to support them. I don't have any magic answers tonight, but I know that we have to do something about it. In fact, we're missing our speaker on restorative justice, but actually part of the answer is to use restorative justice within our schools. And she will be able to talk so much more about it than I can, in the hope that she arrives in time. Now, what we're actually doing, of course, is shoveling the problems to one side instead of dealing with them. And we have to change that. And of course, the more complex the problem, and believe me, I thought this was rather trite until I realised it with my own eyes, the more complex the problem, the more we let down the young person. And that's discriminatory, which is why it's to do with equalities. I just want to talk more briefly now about the findings of this working group that Mary chaired. There are things that I find difficult to understand. I think we've got to be really careful that we don't gum up the situation, the situation with bureaucracy. And this concept of the learner's charter, I'm sorry to say, I believe, will end up being just bureaucratic. Because what it's talking about is about fundamental rights and educational entitlement. Well, yes, but no. Because that process should be going on in schools, who are, of course, inspected by Ofsted. And indeed, if we don't do that, it is so fundamental that we are letting down young people that I think we've got to find a different way to actually get this particular message across. And there could be so much work in determining what rights and entitlements there are, but it's too one-sided because education is a cooperative means of cooperation, fundamentally, with young people in their learning and in their education. So that needs more thought. Where we do have a clear issue is in terms of cultural, religious, and indeed ethnic issues, is the training of teachers. Now, some teachers, trained teachers, adapt remarkably well to different cultures and religions and so on. But others do not. And there is a lack of teacher training in actually how you approach different communities, different ethnic origins, different religious groups, not in terms of the discussion, in terms of the teaching of religious education per se, but in just understanding what the relationship, the working relationship between the teacher and the pupils should be in a most effective way to support their education. And to have more training would be good. The other issues I'll go through quickly. The recent exemption of qualified teacher status for teachers employed in academies will of course enhance inequality because they won't know how to teach. In terms of ombudsman, we already have a local authority ombudsman for local authority schools, church schools and so on. The thing is, what we don't have is an ombudsman for academies and preschools. There's a particular issue which I know the parliamentary party has already picked up. Of course, what will help equalities is the people premium, where it's applied effectively, and that's a subject in itself. Now, the tone of this report is almost, to an extent, slightly confrontational. It's saying, here's the problem, this is how we're going to deal with it. In the short term, it's good, in that respect. In the long term, I want to say this, having been in Hackney for 20 years as a governor, what I realise, and indeed a local council, we need to start patching up the system, which is what this report is proposing, and indeed there does need to be, in the short term, some patching up. What I wanted to suggest, and what I want to encourage, is that we need to do a lot more of actually celebrating the diversity in our communities, demonstrating it in the school's ethos, and actually working towards bringing young people together. Now, there's a lot of that goes on. Sometimes, if it doesn't work, it creates tensions. So I believe that our schools and our education system should be celebrating diversity, because in that way, in the medium-long term, we can get where we want to be. Thanks very much.